Hello, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you join our seminar today and our special topic of leading in uncertainty. So, just a quick reminder for everyone joining us of the regular hygiene items to leave your webcam off and your self on mute. Although we would love to hear where you're joining us from. So, Mark has already let us know he's joining us from Munich. We love our alumni, and we're part of the same big family. So let us know in the chat where you're coming from and where you're joining from. Now we have participants joining from many places. Oh, so Rashid in Qatar, George in Hamburg, Clement in Switzerland. Oh, this is so great. Stockholm and London and Nairobi and Kuala Lumpur. And this is why I love INSEAD. It's like a little mini United Nations. It's a really wonderful place to be. And I think INSEAD has this unique role to play for us in the world and society by bringing us together first and foremost as human beings. So let's jump into the topic. So I'm going to be joined by my co-author, Susanna Furr, who's waving there. And we are the co-authors on this book, Leading in Uncertainty, the Upside of Uncertainty. So I'm actually going to bring it up, but the topic today is a derivative of that, which is how do we lead in uncertainty? And one thing we should say right away is that there's something special about these two co-authors. They share the same last name. So Susanna, why do we have the same last name?
Well, Nathan and I met actually at our freshman year in university, and so we actually are researchers from the beginning together. We kind of fell in love doing a research project. But yeah, this book is an exciting new thing for us because we kind of diverged. I'm an entrepreneur and I've done some other things, and this book was so important to both of us to tackle it from two angles. So I'm really excited to be here.
Great. So you should see my slides about leading in uncertainty. So we want to talk to you about this crucial topic. And, just as a background into the two of us, what do? I study innovation and technology. So I've written a bunch of books about this. And underneath innovation technology is uncertainty. And as Susanna mentioned, she's been an entrepreneur, an innovator, and a creator. Anything you wanted to say more about what you do, Susanna?
No, just that it's really fun for me because I love uncertainty so much. So we kind of bring the academic side. I also did research, but went into more hands-on projects. So I started a clothing line. Currently, I'm creating a garden with this hope that we can learn from the earth how to regenerate ecosystems and bringing that into teams and organizations. So I also, that little 42 is, we have 42 tools in our book, which we're going to dig into in a minute, but I love to be people's sidekick as they navigate uncertainty. And so I shared a tool every day for 42 days in a row, rain or shine. It was really fun. So yeah, I love uncertainty and I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. So let's get into this topic of leading and uncertainty. So Susanna and I, we both live in France. Obviously, being part of INSEAD, I'm actually part of the Fontainebleau campus. Now, I was walking through a cathedral the other day, and I was struck by something that made me so curious. And it was a statue of Joan of Arc or Jeanne d'Arc. Now, what made me so curious is the question, why a statue of a young, uneducated peasant woman from the 1400s? And not only why a statue of her, but actually, if you went in any cathedral in France, you would be likely to see a statue of Jeanne d'Arc. If you went into a public square, you might be a statue of her. If you were going down Rue de Rivoli, you would see a huge golden statue of Jeanne d'Arc. In fact, there are more statues of Jeanne d'Arc than anybody else in all of France. So why, again, more statues of this young, uneducated, untrained peasant woman from the 1400s? And I would propose to you, it's because she had this fundamental leadership capability, which is the ability to lead in uncertainty. Now, cast your imagination back several hundred years. We're nearing the end of 100 years of war. It's a time of great uncertainty because France at this point is on its knees. It has been reduced to a tiny kingdom without a king. There's a prince, but he hasn't been crowned king because the cathedral where you're crowned is in enemy territory. The only thing standing between the English and total victory is the city of Orleans. After that, it's fairly easy to defeat the French. And imagine you're one of these French soldiers standing on the edge of Orleans with the camps of the English out before you, demoralized, defeated. It is a period of great uncertainty. And what did Jeanne d'Arc do? She painted a picture of the possibility of what France could be in the moment of uncertainty. She brought a vision that France could rise from its knees, that it could be great again, that the king would be crowned. And in fact, when she came down to Orleans, it wasn't that she brought a great army, it was that she brought that vision of what could be in the face of greatest uncertainty. And when I look at other leaders, I see the same thing. And so to me, there's this fundamental tie between leadership and uncertainty that is critical to unpack, especially in our current era.
Yeah, so we have here this World Uncertainty Index, and it's definitely increasing. I got to be at Cybos in Toronto last week with economists, and I was speaking to this gentleman, John Kay, and he was saying, I actually don't think it is. But he agreed that it feels like it is. It feels we know more. We have this global, we have tech in our pockets that is updating us all the time. Our kids are telling us of all these kind of crises that are going on. And the problem is we feel it, and therefore we can fall into traps. And so for a minute, we want you to take this poll where you are going to be asked, where in your life are you experiencing the most uncertainty? So is it kind of what I would say personal or at home? So that could be relationship things, that could be mental health issues of you or loved ones, can be a physical stressor or disability, and then career. So either overwhelmed, unfulfilled, or not employed.
Yeah. So again, just a quick pulse on how you're feeling. Thanks so much for sharing. Oh, interesting. So we're seeing results coming in. We kind of get a sneak peek of the results. We'll share those with you.
The
In a
really
moment.
important thing to remember is that however this falls, what we have to know, because we are humans and wired to not like the feeling of uncertainty, is that if it's mainly in career, it's still, I promise you, coming back and impacting our life at home. And if you're in uncertainty at home is the stressful thing, it's going to trickle in the other way into your career. And so it's good just to take this moment of awareness to think, well, wait a second, where is this happening?
So we're going to pause the poll here and show you the results. And what we're seeing here is that about 74% of you are feeling the most uncertainty at work and career. Too much work, unemployed, unfulfilling. And this is a very common theme. So when we talk to other organizations and leaders, there's so much, there's war, there's inflation, there's economic uncertainty, there's technology uncertainty, and some of you are feeling it at home. And we have a lot of experience with that as well. So thank you for giving us a sense of what you're feeling. And we want you to know you're not alone, right? So if we actually, I think, to me, whether uncertainty is increasing or increasing doesn't really matter, because the issue is how it feels. And I loved how the former CEO of Ben and Jerry's put it. He said, listen, the world now is paradox. There's ambiguity and paradox everywhere. Now, here's the clincher. For people who like the linear route forward, life is getting harder and harder in any field. That's the feeling we're all feeling. And I don't know about you, but I was taught the linear route forward. I was taught, plan your life and execute it. And the big dilemma is most of us aren't taught how to deal with uncertainty.
So we know from sad experience that if we haven't been taught this, which I think all of us would maybe feel somewhere like that is true, then we do things that are maladaptive because, again, we're wired to fear it. So our human kind of animal side kicks in, our fight or flight. We might misinvent. We might take the first option that comes along. We call that premature certainty. again, rumination, anxiety, all of these things lead to a sad outcome for us. And the other thing that we might do is offer a false certainty for others. We might think as a leader, it is my job that I am just going to fake it until we make it. And actually, a lot of the questions that came in from the signups were asking, what is it better to do? And I think it's, again, back to this conversation I had with this economist last week, his point, and he's way older than me, so he's way wiser probably from all that he's been through. He said, we believe that leaders need to be able to have permission to say, I don't know, but they don't stop there. So we're going to talk you now through this framework we came up with, because it's truly important to recognize. Oh, and Nathan, give your little spiel about, there's been research about this.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just wanted to say there is research that shows we can get better, and people who get better are more creative. They're better entrepreneurs and better managers. But what I found missing in that research was how. And so our effort was to answer how. And so we went out and we talked to, great change makers and innovators and Nobel Prize winning scientists, but also people who are in more kind of regular walks of life, maybe paramedics, for example, or startup investors, people who have learned to deal with uncertainty. And the framework is pretty simple. One thing, by the way, is that Mark brought up VUCA. So we've heard different terms, and we want to clarify, what do we see as the difference between risk and uncertainty. I would say risk, Frank Knight, the great economist, really, he was very emphatic that these two things are very different. So risk, he compared more to like a pair of dice. You know the variables, you know the probability distribution, you just don't know what value you're going to get. And this is something that is appropriate to try to manage and control. So we want to manage the risk in our factories so nobody gets hurt, for example. But uncertainty is a very different thing. It's where we may not know the variables. We may not know the probability distribution. We might not even have a mental model to think about it. And so here, the task is fundamentally something different. It's unmeasurable. It could be bad, but it could be good. So think about something like Chat GPT and generative AI. Like, this is uncertain. We don't know what the future will be. And rather than trying to manage and control it away, we actually need to embrace it because it's linked to new possibilities. So we're going to focus on the uncertainty piece and have some key thoughts about that. Susanna?
Yeah. So again, this book, when it was started, Nathan started researching 2 decades ago, talking to people, asking questions, and really focusing on that uncertainty that you plan. So like startups or any change makers that are going after a new technology, that's planned uncertainty. You're going after it, you're chasing it. But what it became very clear to us is that actually uncertainty happens to us. And we were in the moment of really putting these thoughts on paper when COVID happened. And we thought, oh my gosh, is this book going to hold true? And that was some question coming through too, is the uncertainty we face that we want to face different than the uncertainty that happens to us, like a pandemic or inflation?
Yeah.
And the exciting thing is that, yes, it is a framework that, because again, it hits us as that human, at that human level of panic and fear, we can use the same tools, because even the uncertainty we would never choose has possibility attached to it. And so we like to say this is one coin and 2 sides. It's possibility and uncertainty. So when we see uncertainty, we need to believe that there is possibility waiting for us, that it's a portal.
Absolutely. And we came up with really a set of tools to help you build what we believe is this fundamental ability that we will all need for the future, wherever we are in an organization or life, which is uncertainty ability. That is the ability to face the unknown, to face that side of the uncertainty side of the coin so that we can get to the possibility side of the coin. Now, here's the big challenge. Because organizations of the past lived in a more stable environment, they did not have to develop this uncertainty ability. But we need this new capability for our new era. And so the big thing we're wrestling with is, how do we hire, train, and lead people in a world of uncertainty but we don't have models for this. We can't go out to the top 20 companies navigating uncertainty and ask what they did. We have to create those. So this one thing we want to do is call out to you for assistance. And I would like you to email us. Email me. I've put my email there at the bottom of the screen, nathan.fur@insead.edu, because we're looking for examples of organizations who have started to learn to do this well. So, for example, I know that the luxury house LVMH hires for the ability to navigate uncertainty. But even more important, we want to work with you to co-create the answers for how to hire, train, and lead. So if what we talk about today seems interesting, reach out to us and we'd like to have a conversation with you about how we can help hire, train, and develop people who can lead through uncertainty.
And I just put my email in the chat. So email me too, because I might get back to you sooner than Nathan.
Oh,
Be honest.
those darn INSEAD professors. Yeah, we know how this goes.
But I'd love to just get cracking because we have so many good questions from all of you. So here you see this first aid cross. It's really what we decided to use to help anchor all these 42 tools because it's so many. And so as you see, there's 4 categories. And we're going to share one from each of them with you. But just briefly, reframing is about seeing the possibility that is connected to uncertainty, and reframing really, truly, just always like a light switch. We call it transilience, that moment when you remind yourself, wait, there is something good or could be good coming out of this. Priming is preparing tools. So the preliminary steps you take to really get ready for acting under uncertainty, which is the do phase. So then we talk about how there's different ways to navigate it, that some are better than others. And then at the bottom, we have the sustain tools, and we do use the Paris coat of arms that most of you have probably seen all over Paris, a boat that's sinking, or that's not sinking, it's tossed on waters. And it's always, not always, it has sometimes the Latin that says tossed, not sinking, because you are going to feel tossed and things are going to go differently than you thought. So let's start with framing.
Let's jump in on framing. Now, most of you probably learned about this basic mechanism in one of your classes, probably an OB class. But before we get into it, we want to just say, the level of uncertainty you currently face. Let's do a quick check-in to get a pulse again. Is it challengeable but manageable, too high but in control, way too high and out of control, or boring? Not enough certainty. So let's open up that poll and just get another pulse check on how you're feeling in general. Let's see. Great. And we'll give you a chance to weigh in here. What I wanted to say about framing is it's this, very familiar effect, which is the way you describe something to people changes how they think, decide, and act. Okay, so let's maybe we're still getting a few more votes in, but we'd love to share the results with you. So let's apologize if you are still putting in your response, but most of you are feeling like it's challenging but manageable. A good third, though, are feeling it's too high. 10% way too high. And 3% maybe need to challenge themselves a bit more. And so just kind of how do you compare to other groups and other organizations? I would say that you seem to have a better handle on uncertainty in general, but you're still feeling a lot of uncertainty. So thank you for sharing that with us. And what we want to do is, help you kind of, how do you do something about it? Okay, so let's move forward and about this first category of things to do on the face of uncertainty, which is reframe. As I mentioned, framing changes how you think, decide, and act. The great illustration of this was the study from Kahneman and Tversky, where they gave people a situation. There's a disease, there's 2 treatments, treatment A with 95% chance of success, treatment B with 5% chance of failure. Even though those things are exactly the same, we all want the 95% chance of success. Why? Why do we pick it if it's that one, if it's the same? It's because we're wired by evolution to be gain seeking. We want to win, and loss averse. We don't want to lose. Now, this is so important when it comes to uncertainty, because if, as we proposed, uncertainty and possibility are two sides of the same coin. If we're always framing what we meet in terms of the uncertainty, we'll trigger the loss aversion and we'll run away, we'll demotivate. Thus, we will never reach the possibility side of the coin. So the task at hand is to acknowledge the uncertainty, but ask, how do we also frame in terms of the possibility, so we trigger that gain seeking part of our brain? We trigger the positive energy. And we want to give you a couple examples of this in action.
So I would love to share. This is a personal one. So from our family, we have 4 children. Their ages 18 to almost 25. And we were so cozy when they were little. You know, we took them to the zoo in the morning with strollers. We were always just trying to pack full the energy. And of course, when you're the parent, you get to force your kids to come with you. And as our kids were coming into young adulthood, and one of our children was in the US studying and sometimes didn't want to come home in the summers. And all of a sudden it was like a record scratch, like, because Nathan was like, but we worked so hard to be so close. And why don't our kids want to be with us 24/7? And not really, but there was this moment of he was framing how our family was going to go forward and seeing it as a very limited, sad version, that it was like, dang, this is over. You know, we didn't manage to get these kids just loving to be at home and everyone doing the same thing. And then one day he himself came to me with this new framing. And it was this beautiful idea of a diving board with different platforms out in the sea. And he and I together as parents, we were this diving board platform thing. And I was like following, like, okay, keep going. And he said, we're meant to just tell our kids we love them so much. They can come when they want. There's always a place for them. They can go when they want. And we are going to be here. And we don't have to love everything they do. And we don't have to love everything they choose or how often they come. And it really was this moment. It was one of those light switch transient moments for him mainly, but I was thrilled. Even though it wasn't bothering me as much, I knew they would come around when they felt great. But I loved the diving board because it's such a visual image. And basically what's happened is we shared it with our kids one time because they were feeling kind of sheepish when they were making some choices. They were feeling like we were not going to be proud of. And they came to us once and we said, guys, we need to have a powwow and tell you that we are doing this new diving board method where we love you. Come, go, we'll be here. And they've shared it with cousins now. And I have a sister calling me saying, tell me about the diving board. What am I supposed to do? Because those cousins were wanting parents like us. And so take that. If you have little teeny kids and it's a bummer right now because it's so boring, I don't know, but can you create a frame for your home life or in your relationships, or it could be with your parents, that has more energy and momentum and space, you know, for things to come and go and not to see it as just so doom and gloom. That's really a great one for us of reframing something that was hard, because it was hard.
Yeah. So that's framing in a personal level, from you can't do it to you can do it. But let's talk about doing that at the organization level. So, and at the leadership level. So let's focus on leaders. So one thing about this book is, because we were finishing it off during COVID, we got to see how different leaders responded to this unusually and incredibly uncertain crisis. And there were leaders who said things like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to us, or this is worse than the Great Depression. Now, what were they doing? They were framing in terms of the uncertainty. And how do you think the people who worked there reacted? Well, they started to freak out. They started to check their bank accounts. They started to spend most of their day worrying instead of working. Now, I want you to contrast that approach to framing the uncertainty of COVID to how Brian Chesky, who's CEO of Airbnb, framed that same challenge. Now, to put it in context, Airbnb lost 80% of their business in 8 weeks. Yes, you heard me, 80%. 80%. If anybody had a reason to say this is the worst thing ever, it was them. But while he acknowledged the crisis, he said this is a crisis. He framed in terms of the possibility. What he said is, this is a crisis. But if you look back in history, the great companies were all forged in moments of crisis. This is our moment to show what we're made of. Now, when I frame it that way, you feel differently, don't you? You have a little more energy going to work and a little less energy going to worry. And now that's how a leader frames what's happening, the uncertainty in terms of the possibility. But, the reason we talk about you is because it starts with you. And Brian Chesky was very clear. He said the hardest thing to manage in a crisis isn't a company, it's your own thoughts. As a leader, you could think all is doomed. You can ask, why me? You can get paralyzed. Or you can tell yourself, this is my defining moment. It will leave indelible marks. So, do you see, even for himself, he framed what was happening in terms of the possibility side of the coin, not just the uncertainty side of the coin. And by the way, this applies to organizations as well. So, in a recent analysis comparing the brick and mortar booksellers, Borders and Barnes and Noble, why did Borders fail in the face of Amazon and the internet, and Barnes and Noble survived? They concluded, after looking at all the factors, that Borders framed in terms of the uncertainty, leading them to deprioritize it and avoid the internet, whereas Barnes and Noble framed it in terms of the possibility, leading them to embrace it. So that's what we mean by this framing. And we'd love to do is give you a tool to do that.
Okay, so frontiers, it's a great one for rethinking, because usually a frontier, but what we mean by that is just that moment before, like, here, I'm comfortable, I know what I'm doing, and the frontier is anything you haven't done. So even if tons of people have done it, but you haven't, it's a frontier for you. And so what we loved is, as we interviewed people who like change and who want to make it happen, often they would say things like, well, I love uncertainty. And one gentleman said, well, I love the frontier. And we thought, oh, maybe that's a way to get people excited about the idea of getting on the frontier. This gentleman, David Hyatt, we're going to share a video with you about him, but he actually will even say he loves the frontier so much because it's where he does his best work. So while you watch this little video, I want you to be thinking about what you feel about getting on frontiers, if it's something you like, if it's exciting to you, or if it's stressful. And that's okay, because you could like it and it could be stressful at the same time.
I think I've always loved business, but I've always thought that business can do good. And I think I've always thought that a business could be a tool for some kind of change that you believed in. Back in 1986, I arrived on Paddington train station and I had to go looking for work. And I got a job in advertising at a place called Saatchi & Saatchi. But I decided to myself that actually I climbed the wrong mountain. It was a beautiful mountain, but it was the wrong mountain. And that's why I quit London and wanted to get back to Wales. And the way to do that was by actually starting my own businesses. I asked myself, what am I going to go and do now? What do I do well? What does this town do well? And actually the answer was, it made jeans. It was the biggest and best jeans factory in Britain, bar none. And in 2001, those gates closed, but those makers still had all the skills. And for me, if we go to this town making jeans again, and we get 400 people their jobs back, and we go and prove actually you can make in Britain, and you can do it really, really well, then we'll have done a really great job. I've never been into that thing of just like, let's build a business to make a ton of money. But I've been really driven by actually, let's go make a ton of change. And I guess that's what drives me.
Okay, so the frontier there was starting a business in a place where it already failed. And I love how Susanna kind of captured that moment when we asked, gosh, how did you step into that incredible uncertainty? And he was very clear. He said, you can only do your best work when you're at the frontier. You have to be at the frontier if you want to do something new. So
it's important to know, you can change the slide. There's so many different kinds of frontiers. This is first a slide that's showing you the frontiers in a personal life, like all of these different areas. And again, we're not suggesting you go on all your frontiers at once, but there's also frontiers as leaders and as organizations. And I think in the case of David Hyatt, he actually was getting on the frontier of a lot of these. Because if you think about the product, he decided he was going to make they're kind of high-end jeans and he's really training his customers to not wash them and do all the things so that it's a more ecologically friendly product, because jeans are one of the worst. But he also got on the frontier with his customer, and he got on the frontier with his employers. He lets his people come and go on their own hours. He motivates them by saying, like, well, what do you want? And so there's so many ways as a leader that you can think about. In his case, he said, what do I do well? What do the people here do well? What is this area about? And so it's really not just making something up out of nothing. I actually saw a question I want to just bring up here in the past section on framing. How is framing different from self-deception? And I mean, that's a kind of an intense thing. And it might be a joke, but what I want to say is it isn't just making something and pulling something out of thin air. Framing and frontiers are real things that you need to do. It's like you're cutting through the noise and saying, what's important to me? What do I believe in? And then going after it and trusting, though, like on a frontier, that it might be where you're going to do the best work. If you stay far back, you're not going to make any change. Everything will stay the same. So we love to ask people, usually when we have a little bit more time, we would ask people to share what you have done. When was a time when you got on the frontier and it felt good? Like it felt really good. And you were scared, but you did it. And then you look back and can see, wow, that was a really important moment for me. So if you want to add some of those in the chat, that's a little bit of a longer question. We're going to have you add some ideas in a minute on another tool. And I think we could actually move on to that now because.
Yeah. So the second category of things to pay attention to, again, the first category was reframing. Second category is a little more doing oriented. It's prime or prepare. And we chose the word prime because think about how if you go to paint a wall, the first thing you do is put on a layer called primer, which allows the paint to stick. So the spirit is, how do I be prepared in advance so that when the uncertainty happens, myself and my team are more robust? And one of the tools we liked was called uncertainty balancers. And it was curious how we came across this tool, because when you ask people about uncertainty, they will often say really intense things like, I love uncertainty. This one woman we interviewed said, I eat uncertainty for breakfast. And I was like, not me. I don't do that. But when you ask more questions and dig deeper, what you realize is there's a different story on the backstage of their life. So on the front stage, they may say, I love uncertainty. But on the back stage, they're doing some curious activities to create islands of certainty for themselves, things that give them comfort to embrace the uncertainty that they choose. So for example, that woman who said, I eat uncertainty for breakfast. No, she doesn't. She eats granola for breakfast, and she eats the exact same granola wherever she is in the world because she carries that granola with her because it gives her comfort, and so she can spend that limited amount of energy for uncertainty on the things that really mattered. And as we interviewed people, we saw so many different tactics to create these islands of certainty to balance out the uncertainty that they felt in other parts of their life. These could be habits, routines, and rituals like carrying the granola or maybe wearing the same clothes. I mean, think about how many innovators you know. Steve Jobs, for example, wore very similar clothes so they didn't have to think about it. Rituals and routines, outsourcing and simplification, even humor and sarcasm, a little bit of gallows humor actually helps people deal with uncertainty. But the biggest is relationships and communities. And so people would describe to us how they tried to create stability in some part of their relationship life, whether that was with a significant other or whether it was with communities of people who shared similar interests. And that gave them an uncertainty balancer. We have a couple examples for you in practice. So recently we did a little training and people responded on the left here. This is a word cloud of some of their personal uncertainty balancers. Another example is we were teaching one of the big tech companies, and their chief security officer told us a interesting story about an uncertainty balancer. What she talked about was how whenever there's a security breach, she asks, how bad is it? And if it's moderate or not so bad, she'll go on a walk first, because that helps her kind of balance out all the anxiety and uncertainty of what should I do. But if it's really bad, she says, I go and get a massage, because it helps her, again, create that certainty, create that calm that allows her to see clearly and lead through the uncertainty. So those are uncertainty balancers at a personal level.
Yeah, I just think it's really a fun thing to think about right now. Just maybe this would be a moment to add into the chat. What are some uncertainty balancers that you are using that you didn't even realize were maybe doing that for you? Honestly, I don't think you can have too many uncertainty balancers, especially in the world right now where every day it feels like we wake up and we're almost scared to look at our news because so much chaos is happening. And so an uncertainty balancer, I know for us as a couple at different times, it was like getting together and we'd play board games just together, almost like to just take off they were intense board games enough that you brought your whole focus onto it. And you felt like you left that decision alone for a while. Or, with kids, I mean, it's an important thing if you're a parent. Kids need these too, not just little kids with stuffed animals. That was a big one for our little children. They all had matching ones and they could kind of act through their feelings using those. But big kids need uncertainty balancers. Like our kids love when there's a cozy family dinner and we're all there and we're just relaxed.
And guess what? Teams need them too. And so one of my favorite examples of an uncertainty balancer for a team came from one of our INSEAD alumni. And what she told me about is she was working at an EV, electric vehicle charging startup. So they weren't doing the charging, they were providing the hardware. And that business is looking great today. But, 5 years ago, there were a lot of ups and downs about whether this would work or not. And they had created an uncertainty balancer for their team, which was that every Friday afternoon they met, they talked about how things felt, what had happened, what worked, what didn't work. And then they went out and got a drink together. And that was really created that uncertainty balancer for everybody to navigate that uncertainty. So we would really challenge you to think about, what uncertainty balancer maybe could you introduce as a leader for your team? And so, yeah, I would love to hear, by the way, in the chat about that.
So there's some great ones coming through here, and I did see one that said binge eating, and that was important. No, it's true, because guess what? We also often make uncertainty balancers in things that aren't helpful. And the person even said, like, it's not great, but that's what I do. And so a lot of times we do, again, remember that maladaptive thing. Our animal body, our creaturely self is going to find a way to try to crank down the temperature. And so if we don't have really robust, helpful uncertainty balancers, we will do things that aren't helpful. And we have a daughter who, when we first moved to Fontainebleau, and she was in college, that's the hard years. It's like the equivalent of starting middle school. And she was not fluent in French and kids were really teasing her. And she told us, well, guess what my uncertainty balancer was? I ate one of those Milka chocolate milk bars every single day in my bed. And we were like, oh no. But the point is real. We will uncertainty balance ourselves one way or the other. And so if we really stoke up the gorgeous, we want to get a big net full of great uncertainty balancer exercises. And it's really something that can be started and tweaked. You can do one and think, no, that didn't help. So just experiment with it and share your ideas. Keep sharing them because there's some great ones in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm excited to take a look. I'm sharing my presentation, so I'm not able to watch the chat as much. But while those are coming in, we'd love to tell you about the third category of things to do, which is how do you take action in the face of uncertainty? And here the emblem is the sailboat, and think about how the sailboat catches the wind. And so it has to kind of adjust and adapt to catch that wind. And this ties into the question we raised at the beginning, where we said, as a leader, you do not have to pretend that you know where you're going or what the outcome will be. In fact, nobody really knows that, if we're honest, and you're leading smart people, and they probably know that you don't know either. So it's not that we're trying to sell people a false vision that you know and that there is no uncertainty. Instead, we're saying paint the possibility and then say we're going to find the answers together. And to do that, one of the best, most kind of deeply rooted in research tools is what we called small steps, which is let's just paint a picture of the small steps we'll take to resolve the uncertainty. Now, some of you may have been in class with me, and if you were, I probably told you the story of Jen Hyman. She was an MBA student in one of my friend's classes, and she had this idea. Her little sister had been invited to a wedding, but the sister did not have a dress to wear. Well, she had a dress, but she'd already appeared in the dresses she owned in all the Instagram photos. She wanted a new dress, but she couldn't afford it. And Jen had this idea. She said, well, what if we could take that idea of designer dresses and combine it with this thing we call the internet? We could do something like Netflix used to do. Netflix used to mail people DVDs. Let's mail people dresses. People can go online, pick out a dress for the evening, receive it by mail, and send it back. Now, that idea is what we might call, what she wanted to call was rent the runway. And, we could acknowledge that's a possibility, but she doesn't really know, if we're honest, who her customers are, what the product should be, what the business model should be. In other words, there's a lot of uncertainty. But the way she went about resolving that is what's really critical. She broke it down into a series of small steps or experiments. So, for example, one of the key questions is this even a problem worth solving? Does anybody care? And, how would we figure that out? And what I love is she said, well, gosh, one way to figure that out is to go borrow a bunch of money and build a big website and buy a bunch of dresses. But another way to figure that out is very fast and very simple. She just borrowed dresses from friends. She set up a kiosk on campus before one of the big dances, and she let women come in, try on a dress, rent it, and then see what happens. And what she found is that this very large percentage of women who came in rented a dress, and they all returned it in good condition. Now, that experiment just took a week and almost no money, but she was able to resolve the uncertainty and then take the next step, which was, well, what about if women cannot try on the dress? What if they can only see it, which is what happens if you rent online? So she repeated the experiment, but this time women could only see the dress, but not try it on. And she goes on like that, one small step after another, resolving the uncertainty. So the key thing as a leader is you can acknowledge the uncertainty. You can even say, no one really knows, but we can create that future together through, and what are the small steps we can take to get there? And by the way, research also shows that you can relax a little bit. You don't have to do it all at once. So there was this very interesting comparative case study that came out of my alma mater, Stanford, and it compared pairs of startups doing similar things and asking, is it better to try to do everything at once or try to focus on one thing at a time? And what they found is that it looks at on the surface like doing everything at once is better. So Zarly was one of the companies they looked at. They had all these wonderful achievements. They'd won first place at a big competition. They'd gotten 15 million in funding. They'd gotten call outs from big folks like Bill Gates and Meg Whitman. And their COO made it sound like they were doing everything, building software, building teams, opening offices, doing everything all at once. Meanwhile, poor little PaintZen felt really left behind. They were doing something very simple. They'd been founded by some entrepreneurs who had been successful in cleaning services. All they had together was a hack together webpage, and they were really focused on the core task, the really challenging task of doing paint estimation online accurately. And then they started adding on one thing after another. Well, what happened as a result? Well, the big takeaway from this study, was very simply, Zarly imploded. Zarly failed because they couldn't actually learn from those small steps. They were doing so many things at a time that they couldn't get any of them right. Whereas Paint Zen focused on the most important thing and then shuffled to the next set of tasks. And as a result, they were able to learn more effectively what the true uncertainties were and how to resolve them. So here's the big takeaway. When it comes to taking action, you don't have to know the answer. You don't have to pretend you know the answer. You just need to paint the process by which you'll get there. And the process is, we're going to take small steps. We're going to run experiments that will teach us the right way to go. And we don't have to do it all at once. We can actually focus on the most important things and tackle those and resolve those one at a time.
And really quickly, just I want to add that in that do section, because he picked one that's so tangible and important, I wanted to share, just add a little sprinkling on top of that tool of small steps with this idea of letting those small steps be anchored in your values rather than external goals. Because we had a question come in that said, well, how do you ensure success while dealing with uncertainty, navigating life transitions and change? And truly, when we talk about that tool, it's kind of the only one that we can ensure, because even if you take small steps and really do that, you might not end at the place where you had hoped. But if you do it with your values, then your navigation of that uncertainty will be so worthwhile to you. And so you got to think about that maybe a little bit more, but it's an important one to add with that very, helpful, but kind of tactical one.
Susanna, I want to add in there, Susanna,
Yeah.
There's a little wrinkle here, and that is that research shows that actions motivated out of those bases of meaning, like my values, are actually more successful than actions motivated just on goals. So for example, they would do experiments where they would have people go out and do fundraising calls. And the folks who had experience talking to other students who had benefited from scholarships and they felt the value of that scholarship, were much more effective at actually raising money for scholarships than folks that were just told, we have a goal of 10 million in scholarship money. So it's very interesting. There's a broad body of research that supports what you just said.
Yeah. So you guys, we've come to this last category of tools, and it's the sustain section. And sometimes we say, depending on where you're at in your uncertainty journey, you might want to start here first. So these aren't necessarily in any order, because sustain tools come in handy in that moment when it feels like all is lost or that it's sinking. And that moment when you feel like, I don't think I'm going to be able to keep going, or someone's not letting me keep going on something I care about. And so once again, we broke the tools down into little easier headings, because we want you to just really remember in any stressful moment, okay, I need 3 things. The first is emotional hygiene. And it's really just like it sounds. It's that moment where you let yourself be a human and feel the human frustration and grief sometimes, and distress at what is happening to you. And that might involve getting a coach or someone you need to talk to. It might talking to the person who's harmed you or making it difficult with you, which is sometimes scary. It might just be adding tons of uncertainty balancers and taking a mental health leave on something for a while. And if you have to really change gears, it might be just letting yourself be mad for a few days. So emotional hygiene is real. It's a really important part of navigating uncertainty. If you just squash it down, again, we had a question about that as a leader. Am I supposed to just bottle all my stress in? No, you're not. And it won't work, actually. The second tool is reality check tools. Sorry, the second category. I'm going to share one with you now. And it's really the work of Martin Seligman, who's known as the founder of positive psychology. Learned optimism was interesting because he kind of came upon it while he was studying learned helplessness. And the little experiment they ran was, it's a sad one, where they would shock these dogs in this little cage. And they did this enough times so that then when they changed the experiment to show the dog that there was a way that it just needed to jump over this little small barrier that it could totally do to get away from the shocking, the dogs didn't jump over. They stayed there because they'd learned that this was their life, that this was the only option, that they get shocked and there's no way out. And so he thought, we need to look at this further. And so when in the studies of humans, Not shocked, of course, but in this study, looking at what do humans do when something repeatedly happens that's frustrating or feeling like a setback? There were a certain category of humans, of people that didn't feel really impacted. And if they did, they got over it. And it led to this huge study of work, which I would really recommend looking at. And there's even an abridged thing on Audible where you can listen to a very short version and it lets you kind of take a quiz to figure out the reality is we think of pessimists and optimists as being born, but it's really a learned explanatory style. It's just the way that you see the world. And it might really be impacted by your genes, but also from your culture and the people that have taught you how to see the world. So for a pessimist, a learned pessimist, when something bad happens, it feels permanent. It feels like it impacts everything. And it feels really personal. Learned pessimists, they tend to take things as their fault. Well, if you have that recipe, that's a hideous cocktail for feeling excited about uncertainty, right? It's going to make you catastrophize things and you're going to feel really probably unmotivated and depressed. Now, let's look at what learned optimists do. Same thing could happen, same setback, but they turn it around. They see the setback as temporary, so they know it will end. They know it will change. They also see it as impacting the one thing it impacts. So if they did have a really unfortunate experience in one setting, so at work, what if a conversation went poorly or an idea you came up with, no one on the team liked? Instead of thinking, I'm a hideous employee or I'm a bad idea generator, they would just be like, oh, that didn't work right now. Maybe they even would tell themselves, you know what, it's an awesome idea. I'm putting it in my drawer. So they wouldn't feel like this means now I'm a loser on all counts. And then they also, even when things go wrong, they don't take it personally. They help kind of externalize what happened. Again, not in a self-deceiving way. They learn to take responsibility, but it's so much easier to do when you're seeing it as temporary and local. So really not personalizing it. This frees up, Seligman says, so much energy for positive, constructive action to get yourself out of it. So if you look at these two things, the difference is that one has negative thoughts and spirals in that negativity. On the other hand, they're having the same experience. They might even have a negative thought, or he calls it belief, but they've learned how to dispute the belief. And he gives a ton of ideas about how to do it. But you know what? We use this so much in our lives because we have learned, once we've learned this now, we see it everywhere. And we remind each other like, hey, that sounds like a really negative belief. I mean, you can keep it if you want. Sometimes it's annoying when someone reminds you like, feels a little bit learned pessimist, but it's helpful. And so I would encourage you, share this idea, just this little rain cloud and the sunshine. Share it with the people in your life and with your teams, because if you can get really robustly good at disputing negative beliefs that happen to you, even as a team, you are going to have this constructive action and this increased energy. And uncertainty is going to have negative things. Some of them will be just beliefs that aren't true, and some of them will be true. And so how much more then do you need to figure out how to move forward?
Yeah, I actually spent some time with the head of a big retail organization recently, and she had just been appointed as CEO, and the results were bad because it was recessionary period. And she was, without realizing it, doing all those things on the left that is permanent, it affects everything, and it's my fault. And literally all I did was help her reframe and say, hey, it's temporary. Recessions come and go. And, my guess is some parts of your business are actually still doing well. And that was true. And by the way, it's not your fault. You didn't make a recession. And I literally saw her face brighten up and have the energy to move forward. So that's the spirit of what we were talking about here. Okay. So in summary, there were a lot of tools we could have talked about. We wished we could have talked about more, but we talked about 4 things to do to lead through uncertainty. Number 1, there is uncertainty and possibility. There are 2 sides of the coin. Reframe in terms of the possibility, not just the uncertainty. And we talked about frontiers as a way to do that. So what's the frontier that you could learn from? Number 2, how do you prepare? You can do things in advance to be more robust. And we talked about uncertainty balancers as a way to do that. Number 3, take action, but do it using small steps. It's okay to admit you don't know, but frame around the excitement of creating the future together. And we're going to use small steps to get there. And number 4, sustain yourself through the inevitable setbacks. And we talked about learned optimism, re-seeing things as temporary, isolated, and impersonal. Now, again, I just want to repeat the little call to action. This is all leading to a capability to face uncertainty that we need to develop, that we actually need to learn how to hire people who have developed this in their lives, to train them, to help them, to lead, to help our leaders. And so please do reach out to Susanna or I if you either know of an organization who does this well that we should talk to, or B, you're interested in this co-creating maybe an exercise where we help people develop this skill. If you want to know more about the tools, of course, we would love it if you went and bought the book, The Upside of Uncertainty. But we also created a website with the same name, and the little QR code will take you to that website where we actually summarize all the tools and also some additional kind of learning resources to help you develop your uncertainty ability. So with that, why don't we pause here and answer a few questions?
Hi, lovely, lovely. Thank you very much for the very simple and practical framework. You've answered quite some questions. There's one question left in the Q&A tab, and I'd like to take also one from the pre-survey, and I think then we are already out of time. So it's all now regarding the application of this wonderful framework. In the chat was asked, how do I manage uncertainty in marriage and relationships? So one specific application. And another one from the pre-survey was, how do I implement this as a manager for my team, for my employees? You have 4 minutes.
I'll take a marriage and relationship, because as you can guess, writing a book with the person who's your best friend and the co-parent with you and your roommate can be super tricky and super awesome. And so we had to keep reframing as, is this awesome? Or do we want to see all the negative downsides where we were at, we kind of have disagreements sometimes about the best way to do something. And one of the most fabulous tools in the third category of sustain, which I didn't get to talk to about, it's magic, which sounds so weird, but we aren't talking about wizards. We're talking about those flashes of insight or those serendipitous things that happen, come into our lives that we can't really take credit for. And basically, with Nathan and me in our relationship, which was also having needs to be looked at, not just in our working relationship together now, which is super robust, but in our marriage and like wanting to shift and transform that, we have a tool called As If. And it's basically this idea that many social protests and important movements have been built on. And it's this ability that when you want something so much that you live as if it were already real. So it's the thing that Rosa Parks, we talk about in the United States during the civil rights movement. It was the thing that enabled her to get on the bus and sit down because she was living as if she had the equality she deserved. And so many movements have taken this energy that comes with, what if I just pretend that we're already there? And so Nathan and I will look at each other and say, hey, let's live as if. And we know what it means. Like, put down the frustration about how things aren't perfect yet and live as if we were in that space. But to do that, you have to be really clear about what are you wanting. And so have those amazing conversations together first, and then remind each other, like, let's put down this fight and all this bickering, and let's live into the thing that we both want. And you can pretend, and it's different though than faking it till you make it, because it has a lot of heart and it has a lot of integrity. It's like you're really doing it because you really care.
So what I would say is, for the manager helping your team, I would walk you through all the 4 arms of what we just talked about. So let me give you a concrete example. We worked with a big organization in food, and they were struggling with the uncertainty of recession. How do you reframe that in terms of the possibility? Well, they kind of realized, well, gosh, we're kind of much more financially stable than our competitors. Maybe this is actually an opportunity to grow through acquisition. Oh, and by the way, we're a global company, and we have some countries in our portfolio who have wrestled with inflation for a decade plus. Why don't we go talk to them and see what are the best practices? And then I would say, again, how would you prime? We talked about uncertainty balancers. What could you introduce for those teams? So, for example, I saw many leaders in COVID introduce a practice such as getting to know somebody on the team or sharing an inspirational thought. that created an uncertainty balancer for folks. And again, on do, small steps, I would say, well, how do we break down our inflation response into a series of small experiments? Let's test and learn the right way to go forward. And then lastly, sustain. We talked about, even I gave the example of that CEO. How do we make it temporary, local, and impersonal? This recession, this inflation, it's not your fault. It'll resolve one day. It's not, how do we, it only affects part of our business, maybe not all of it. How do we move forward with more positive momentum in discovering a solution? So hope that helps. Again, I would really encourage you to, as we talked about, to reach out to us if you have an interest in kind of co-creating solutions to this, or know organizations or leaders we should interview further to systematize how do we develop uncertainty ability. And we want to thank you so much for your time and your attention. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nathan and Susanne. I really appreciate it.
Super fun for us.
Funny, thank you, by the way, for the claps. Funny story. Once I was curious what would happen, and I gave myself a clap. And it was a little bit embarrassing because it showed right on me clapping for myself. So
I think you should clap for yourself. I would say, uncertainty is this moment. Actually, one more question for people that are just leaving. There was a question about, but what if people make you feel like a loser? And I thought, it's so true. Even when you're doing that learned optimism, you might come against people that keep saying, no, but you really are bad at this or that. And I would just lead you to this tool in the reframing section where you go back to like what you know about yourself. Think of that David Hyatt person where he said, what do I do well? And just anchor down on that. Because I promise you, even when we feel so loserish, we can find something that we know we're good at. And it might be really small and it might be kind of feel fragile, but it's there because everybody has that. And so go back to that moment. It's a frame where you reframe yourself as I am so good at this one thing and I'm going to let that be enough.
Thank you so much for these closing words. And I think here we stop it. Everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.